sorry about being late.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. I was trying to do something and then my all of a sudden all my Zoom things went and I had to restart everything.
All good.
And so now I'm good.
Sitting here having a coffee. It's all good.
Hey Todd, how you doing? I haven't seen you in like 20 years.
I know, right? It's been a long time.
I think I had gray hair when I knew you.
I think you did as well. So
was,
yeah, man, we go back a few years. I mean,
yeah.
I'm just trying to think, like, when were you doing Mojo Radio? That was like the early 2000s, wasn't it?
2000, and literally it was 2003 to 2004. It was almost exactly a year. And then one day they brought me in. They brought me in and said, on Monday we're going all sports. And I said, great. Like, do you want me to do more sports stories? And they said, oh no, you're fired.
Oh, like, no, you're done.
I'd never been fired. I think before that I'd never been hired before. So it was my first radio job. It was my first real radio job. I'd done some temp day, fill-in days for people on CBC and things like that, but never had my own Paul Byers show,
Right.
So
and it started off as like the 1, 2, 3 show or whatever?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Like your hours were 1 to 3.
So they gave me the hours of 1 to 3. So I said, like, it'd be funny, it'd be like a punk rock guy counting in a song, but forgetting to say 4. 1, 2, 3. And so then I actually made music that said that. And I was great. It was like having a podcast, except that it was on an allegedly commercial radio station.
Yeah. Have you done much radio like since then?
No. I've been trying to get back ever since. It was but then I did other things. So I, being an author and stuff, I just ended up I applied to, like, I auditioned for NPR here, like in San Francisco.
Okay.
And but that's, you don't just walk in off the street on that one. But I mean, you could, because it's almost community radio, so you could work your way back in. But and then it never worked out. It never worked. I mean, it could work out. I mean, the podcast has been a great example, but me doing a podcast feels like I'm back to doing kind of a radio thing, and radio seems to be coming more like my way too. So
yeah. And I saw that who was it? You just posted something on Twitter 15-20 half hour back. Who's you're like
Miles Copeland.
Yes, that's what it was.
No,
it's
but
huge.
That's okay. So that's what I'm doing though, because with the Record Store Day podcast, I basically went to them and said, they said to me, would you like to do a podcast for us? And I said, well, I've been trying to do a music podcast for a while. And they said they would pay me a small amount of money a week to do it. It's every 2 weeks. And then I said, well, can we make it be like the show that I would do, me interviewing music people, whether they're artists or people in record companies or people who work at record stores. And I interview people, and the common theme is a love of music, but a love of recorded music. And their only agenda is that they're kind of a merchants association for record stores. So they want to make sure that we're constantly reminding people to buy physical media, to go to stores, brick and mortar, and God love them, and that's what Record Store Day does. So yeah. And
podcast 51 already, like it went.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes by in the blink of an eye, when in fact it's about 2 years, almost
a couple years now.
Yeah, because we do it every 2 weeks,
Right.
But yeah, no, and so what I do is I try to get my heroes, like I have Andy Partridge of XTC on. I recorded him recently. Like, that's just for me. I mean, there's probably a few thousand XTC fans who will love that. But then I got Alabama Shake, not Alabama. We wanted to get. I'm blanking on her name.
Oh, the singer of Alabama Shakes?
Yeah. Brittany Howard.
Yes.
Okay.
So for your podcast, for the Record Store Day podcast, like who are some of the more memorable people that you've had on? Like, maybe for people that have never heard your podcast, like recommend a couple episodes to listen to.
Well, I had
Elvis tough to do that, right?
I had Elvis Costello on the show, which was a big deal for me because I'm probably the world's second biggest Elvis Costello fan, only because I'm Canadian and I don't think I can claim first without seeming arrogant. So, but I'm definitely a huge Neil Finn was on my show, which was cool for me.
Crowded House.
Crowded House and Split Ends and stuff like that. I'm actually going through the list of Daniel Lanois. We did a whole hour with Daniel Lanois. That was kind of neat.
Wow.
Of
course, he had a huge career his own self, but he was also a massive Canadian producer.
Well, yeah, I mean, we talked. I mean, that's the thing. What I like to do is I'm starting to do more is just do what I want to do, what I want to hear. Because I'm the producer, I mean, I have people helping me find the guests and negotiate and all that stuff, negotiate the times and stuff. But
Yeah.
generally, I mean, I pick the music that goes on. Little clips here and there. We don't use whole songs because it's not good for the copyright and all that.
Yeah.
So the Dan Lanois was a good example of where I wanted to ask him about his work with Brian Eno because he worked on a lot of those ambient things. I obviously wanted to ask him about Peter Gabriel, and we talked specifically about Red Rain from the So album.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about U2 because you have to talk about U2 if you're talking to Dan. But I also talked about Acadie, his first solo album, and stuff that I really like. I thought, hey, Daniel Lanois here. Let's ask him about all the things you want to ask him about. So I make a list, so I don't forget stuff. And then he has an agenda. He's selling a record called Heavy Sun at the time. So I made sure I listened to that and knew what to ask him about that.
Yep.
And he was so good. And I like it. I think the guests sometimes know, I mean, they sometimes know if you have at least done some research and they feel relaxed. So they go, okay, we're not just going to be talking about, hey, your name's Lanois. It's a French name, isn't it? Like it has to be something really about that they want to talk about.
Right.
And some people might not want to talk about U2. So you have to have 2 or 3 other things to talk about. And because you do this, like,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, you've got to find that, there, especially if you don't know the person. It's easy when you know somebody like you and I mean, sure, we haven't talked for 15, 20 years, but I'm not feeling weird about it. And I didn't do a whole lot of research, to be completely honest, only because I know what I want to ask you. I know what I know what I want to get out of this interview. But if I didn't know you, I would be probably trying to find somebody in your inner circle that I knew to find a way to make you feel comfortable right out of the gate.
No, well, yeah, exactly. And that's what you do. It helps if they're talking about a specific piece of music or something that you have listened to that piece of music and have
exactly.
Because
like, what? You haven't even heard my new album? What?
Like I have weak spots of my own listening where in terms of my day to day, I might not know all the works of Lil Nas X, but if I'm preparing to try and get him on my show because I think he's one of the most fascinating characters in popular music. So I'm becoming deeply immersing myself in Lil Nas X music this week. And that's just so I could be a more responsible interviewer,
Right.
And it's and that also helps me because now my frames of reference are, not my old stodgy crowded house Elvis Costello stuff. And, and so, that's cool. And other times I'll have authors on who have written books like Miles Copeland, but I had Tom DeSavia wrote this book with John Doe about the story of X and Los Angeles punk. And it was such a great history lesson that it was okay to talk to an author rather than a musician because he had all the answers. So if I could say, so what happened with that label? And he'd know, and so you just sometimes do it that way, and I also try really hard to make it not just what we are right now, two dudes sitting around talking, because I mean it's good. I mean, if the dudes are earning their keep, like I hope we are.
I think we are.
But I look at my list and I go, okay, white dude. And so like I'm consciously thinking, let's break it up and have some emerging woman artists or have like classic woman artists. Like I've had Jane Weedland of the Go-Go's and I had Susanna Hoffs of the Bangles, and those, or Tanya Donnelly, or Juliana Hatfield. And that's a way of saying, you're not just going to hear like the usual guys from England in the 1970s on this show, and Questlove was on twice talking about
cool.
Summer of Soul. And again, you don't want to get into the thing where you're seeing them only as what they're not, but you want to just make sure your playlist isn't so, I'm trying to break into areas where I'm not always the only guy, like, you know what I'm talking about. Like,
there's something about diversity, right?
Yeah, and it's a real thing, and I just don't want it to come off as obsequious here, but I what I mean is I'm just conscious of making an effort to make it more, because it's fun. It's actually fun to hear the stories of the Go-Go's telling me, Jane telling me how they had doors closed in their face and were told what to wear, and then they said, screw that.
Right.
And then Miles confirmed it. Miles Copeland, who was on the other end of that, said, yeah, he said that he didn't take the heat for it, but he said that, people were telling us that we shouldn't sign the Go-Go's, or that, they made a big deal about them being all women. And so anyway, by having those guests on the show, you have a chance to let everyone speak for themselves, because there's nothing worse than a guy explaining somebody else.
Right. Totally. No, it's great getting both sides. So obviously with, you have a podcast, the Record Store Day podcast. So their music in the Myers house must have been huge. As a kid, what are you hearing in the house as a kid?
Oh, okay. So first thing is, my older brother, Peter Myers, was like that classic. The analogy I always make is in Cameron Crowe's movie, Almost Famous. He had the young man character had an older sister, and she had all the records. Well, Peter's my older brother, and Peter would bring home first, when we were young kids. Listen, my age is, in the 70s, I was listening to Led Zeppelin. I had grown up with the Beatles music because my parents are from Liverpool, so we had Beatles records in the house, and Wings, and all the solo albums, John, George, Ringo, and then Led Zeppelin, and not so much Sabbath, which is interesting. I don't know if that was a thing, but I was oriented towards the bluesy rock less than the sort of evil rock.
Yeah.
I have a huge appreciation for Sabbath now, but there was a time when it was like, no, give me Jimmy Page over Tony Iommi. It was like,
Sure.
I don't know why that was anyway. But and then I went into prog. I started because I grew up in the same neighborhood as Rush. So I remember, all my first bands learned how to play. Like my very first band in the basement learned how to play Rush songs, Kiss songs, BTO, because they were easy to play, but they're a lot of fun. So and I was very aware of CanCon even then. And what else? But then Rush led me to prog, because Getty was on some interview on Chum FM in Toronto, and he said something about, we've been listening to Genesis and Yes, and I was like, oh, let me hear that. And I actually to this day maintain that Yes and Genesis, prog has this reputation of being overblown and too much fancy stuff. Those are visceral bands. Both of those bands play in the moment, especially Yes. Yes was a real, like a very, almost a jazz group with rock inflections. Like they're Chris Squire is probably one of my favorite bass players of all time.
Yeah. I mean, if people that are listening to this podcast don't know who Yes is, just put on Roundabout.
Yeah. And anything for that album,
and Welcome to Their World, because it's freaking amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and you'll hear nowadays, it's after the punk wars, it's safe now to mention Yes again. And I remember Matthew Sweet was on my show, and he was talking about how much Yes was the first band that made him want to be in a rock band, But anyway, so then that led to the new wave, punk and new wave. So my brother Peter started bringing home the Ramones. Peter brought home the Ramones, and it was like, I heard it coming out of his room. And I just knew it was good. And then my brother Mike went and visited England, and he came back. He was in a soccer tournament. He came back with a 45 of God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols, and it sounded amazing. I mean, it's a pretty produced record when you listen to it. There's like 8 guitars on it, but it sounded really raw and immediate, and we were really excited again. And all of a sudden, I remember I had the Supertramp album, Breakfast in America, and the Sex Pistols single, and I was like holding them both up, thinking, which way do I go? And I ended up going punk rock for a while, and Talking Heads came, like new wave stuff, like Talking Heads, Elvis Costello, my brother, again bringing those home.
Right.
And then so then you're getting into the British stuff like XTC and Susie and the Banshees and stuff. So then I started playing in a band called the Space Invaders that played at this new wave and punk club in Toronto called The Edge. So anyway, there's my musical bio up to about age 20.
Interesting. And what was your first concert you went to?
First concert I ever went to, this is really dating myself. It was a place called the Ontario Place Forum, which was Ontario Place was kind of I know it's more like a public park than a theme park, because they didn't have rides or anything. They had some slides and stuff, but it was mostly just about a park with pavilions and buildings and restaurants. Right. But they had a band place, like an amphitheater, covered amphitheater. It was outdoor, but it was covered. And I saw the Stampeders, who were from Calgary, I believe. Yeah. And I got my mom to take me, because that's what it was, because it was a public park kind of concert. And it was, I think it was free. like the park was free or something. And the on the same bill was the Poppy Family, which is Terry and Susan Jacks from also
the Seasons in the Sun.
Yeah, but it's pre-Seasons in the Suns with Seasons in the Sun when they had Where Evil Grows, which is if you look up the Poppy Family's Where Evil Grows, it is a great psych rock pop tune. It's as psychedelic as, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of the Kenny Rogers pre-country Kenny Rogers song, Just Checked In to See What Condition My Condition Was In.
Okay,
like, it's that kind of what I used to call hoodie. Like it was, whoa, scary evil rock, like Witchy Woman by the Eagles or something. And slightly menacing, but slightly not, But I loved both of those things. But what I mostly loved was seeing people with guitars playing and singing, and you saw a drum kit, you saw the microphone stands and lights changing, and I was, of course, what are you gonna like? It's amazing. So the first sort of rock concert that I sort of went to on my own as a teenager, I think, was Aerosmith.
Wow.
Or it might have been Rush. It was probably Rush at Maple Leaf Gardens, and then Aerosmith at Maple Leaf Gardens. And it was also the first and only time I drank Southern Comfort. I was underage, and I threw up. Actually, I think it was my brother Peter that threw up. I almost threw up, but he was throwing up in the bathroom at Maple Leaf Gardens, and I remember it was insane. But seeing Aerosmith, it was also not the Draw the Line tour, so it was like they were just about to crash.
Yeah, to crash.
So, but I mean, it still had a great bass riff on Draw the Line, and I think Joe Perry was playing like a 6-string bass, and even then I knew what that was. Like it was kind of, I was that kid. You're like, oh my god, he's playing the double neck, And when the Geddy Lee got a double neck guitar in Rush, I was like, oh my god! And one was a guitar and one was a bass. Like it was because he had that Mike Rutherford Genesis thing. Anyway, Tangent City. If you ever talked,
bring it. I mean, I could
I
talk music, dude, for literally hours and just listen to stories, man.
Anyway, so that's where, that was
Aerosmith and Rush, as far as first concerts that you're going to on your own, you're setting the bar at that point.
That's true. It was good. And Massey Hall was a great thing in Toronto, which is still, it's been renovated, but I saw so many great shows at Massey Hall.
What's that like for equivalent in Vancouver? Like
Vogue Theater or the Orpheum.
Wow.
I think the Orpheum. I mean, I saw great shows there too when I lived in Vancouver. I lived in Vancouver, in case I'm assuming most people don't know, from 2001 to 2006.
Okay.
Exactly 5 years, because we got there on July 3rd, right after Canada Day. And then we left on July 1st, 2006. We left on Canada Day again, which was funny, to move back to the United States.
Yeah.
And then we were here for their big holiday, July 4th. So
yeah. And you've been there for since then, right?
Yeah. I mean, here's the nutshell version of my life. 1997, my wife got an offer to work at a publisher in the Bay Area. So we moved from Toronto, having never lived anywhere else but Toronto. So we moved to downtown San Francisco. Wow. Eventually, both of us didn't like the work situations that we had, and there was no way to go lateral because we had visas that were specific to those jobs. So we just decided to go on a trip around Southeast Asia for 6 months, put everything in storage, and then we decided that we would land in Vancouver. And we'd never lived in the West Coast before. We and like so many Torontonians, like evil Torontonians, we had no idea what Vancouver was like. We actually heard about. I mean, I'd seen it on TV. I played there once with the Gravelberries. I played there actually twice with the Gravelberries, but it was in and out. You know what I mean? I would play we played the Town Pump, and then another time we played the Railway Club. Okay. That's the level I rose to in that city.
But both great venues, though.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was so great. I think we were on a not handsome. Ned. No, is it? Oh, I can't remember now. There's a name of an artist. I'm trying to remember who was on the bill with me. But anyway, I remember the Odds came out, who were friends of mine, and actually the Odds are still my friends. And so I knew that much. So that was my one of my big hooks in Vancouver was, hey, I'll be near Craig Northey and the guys. So that's cool. Yeah. So that anyway, so we did that, and then my wife again got another. I was doing okay. I think I had I was on radio here in Vancouver. I was on, Mojo and talk radio for guys. and I tried to make it into the kind of guy like me rather than the kind of guy I think they were aiming at.
Right.
And like I remember having a segment where we talked about Rufus Wainwright, and I thought, I wonder if they're going to get all homophobic out there in Radio Land, but nobody did. I mean, when I lost that job, it was only because the format changed overnight.
Right.
They decided to go after sports radio, and that's fine. And I was out. So, but I was going to say about Vancouver. So it was great, but then Lisa got another job offer in 2006. So we moved back to the Bay Area and then moved to the East Bay this time. So now I'm in like the Berkeley area, and we've been here ever since.
And it's a great city. I've been there a few times, and San Francisco is awesome.
It really is, and if you've lived in Vancouver, it's the phrase I used to use was Westified, to be, to become westernized or Westified. But like to understand the Pacific Ocean, like for a Toronto boy, when you grow up on flat, boring old Lake Ontario, and there's no mountains, and then so to come to the Pacific coast with mountains and sea and birds and bears, and I don't see many bears in this area, but you can find them if you go up, further into the wild. And there's a lot of great nature here. And that, I guess, nature becomes more important when you're in the West Coast. In Toronto, I don't think I cared that much if I got to go away to the mountains,
because you just didn't see them.
Yeah, there's no lure. You could, like, whereas in Vancouver, you literally have
But you could
Mountain.
see.
Yeah, Grouse Mountain staring down at you, and the
I could
lions.
walk to that mountain if I needed to. I could walk there.
Are you in West Vancouver?
I'm in East Van, so I'm.
You're close. Yeah,
I look out my front door and I see the North Shore Mountains. Right. So
I love that. The late John Mann, rest his soul. I saw him on the street years ago, obviously, and we looked up at I looked up at the mountains, and I said, "Did you ever get sick of that view?" Because I didn't, right? And he goes, "No, I've lived here all my life." He said, "I've lived here all my life, and I look at the snowy caps of like grouse and I just but I don't know why I just suddenly went on a tangent thinking about John Mann, but
John from Spirit of the West.
John Mann, one of the greatest, just a great singer, songwriter, and actor, and robbed of life by Alzheimer's disease and passed away about a year ago or so.
Yeah. They had a tribute show at the Commodore Ballroom for him.
After he passed, right?
After, yeah.
I was at the last Spirit of the West shows. I happened to be in Vancouver. I think they became the last shows. They had like a big night with Blue Rodeo guys showing up, and Stephen Page was there, and the Odds. The Odds played on the bill with Spirit of the West.
Oh, cool.
And it was John. John was still able to perform. He had like an iPad with the lyrics, but muscle memory kicked in, and he knew all the words, even though he was foggy about people's names, and Jeff Kelly was helping. Anyway, I've gone into another tangent there, but
no, not at all.
God bless John Mann.
Yeah. The interesting thing about music is that even people with like dementia and like they can't remember their kids' names, or, can't remember where they grew up, or, just shit like that. But yet they can sing all of the words to, their favorite Elvis song, or, there's something about music that really, like, it hits different.
It hits different is the absolute. That's the phrase. My dad had Alzheimer's, and I can tell you that, he, on his last days, he would still remember all the lyrics to songs he heard in the war in England.
Right.
He was an older man, so he'd been in England during the 40s, and so he knew all these songs from the radio. So it doesn't go. Thank God, eh? I mean,
I know
that's the thing about music. We're all so interested in music. I know you are.
Yeah, totally.
And that is
always have been.
It's going to take you. And you don't need a portable music device to have a music memory. You don't need to have any gear. You could be out in the middle of those mountains that we were speaking of, and you can suddenly, if you've deeply listened to something, you'll hear all the guitars and all the vocals and all the lyrics that you've held special to yourself. And that's why this is hard to not get philosophical, but that's why we all talk about music all the time, is because it hits. It really hits,
Totally. I don't want to ask these questions, but I'm going to anyway. I don't want to put you on the spot. Most overrated band on the planet.
Oh, wow. It's easy to piss people off with these answers. Because
They're generally bands that people love too, right? Like for me personally, REM and U2
Oh,
are two of the
interesting.
most overrated bands on the planet.
You know, I could piss a lot of people off. Um, I think, okay, here's one thing. I think that both John Mellencamp
Mm.
and Billy Joel are overrated as great songwriters. I think they're great as performers, but when people speak of so conversation will often go like this: Bruce Springsteen, great American songwriter, just like John Mellencamp. I'm like, what?
Pink
Like
Houses? What?
like get or even like Rain on the Scarecrow, which is good. I mean, but I prefer Jason Isbell and I love Jason Isbell, so that's not a shock. But and the other and the thing about Billy Joel is a great song stylist and has written songs that I think are really great. But when you like, he did that tour with Elton John, and everyone was like, two of the greatest songwriters. I'm like, no, it's Elton John and a really good songwriter with him. Elton John's one of the greatest songwriters, and
Sure.
anyway, so that's how I play the overrated game. I actually think what's this band? So I talked about Yes and Genesis, and then somebody will mention uh Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who I quite liked as a kid, but they're not as good as those other bands to me. Taste being taste. I mean,
Same.
bring it, ELP fans.
Right.
And God bless, Keith Emerson and Greg Lake are no longer with us. I think, is Carl Palmer here? I don't. He's not here anyway. Thank God.
Not
He'd
here
hit me.
either.
He'd hit me with his gong. And then in terms of like, there's this band called Misfits that
Oh, I've
that
heard of those guys.
I didn't really. It didn't speak to me. That wave of punk didn't speak to me, and I get in a lot of trouble for that.
Yeah.
It's and like Danzig and all that stuff. People talk about it, but I think it might even be an age thing. I might have been just a few years too old to get on that train.
Yeah,
Anyway,
possibly.
I don't like dissing anyone, to be honest.
Well, how about the flip side? Let's prop up some bands maybe that are underrated.
Uh, Japan.
Mm.
Japan are a band from the 80s that sounded a little like Roxy Music, but they had like a Georgia Moroder influence, and David Sylvian comes from that band, Mick Karn. I feel like aficionados know Japan, and
like Roxy Music in the Brian Ferry vocals, or just
yeah,
like
Brian Ferry vocals and sort of a stylish style. Like if you listen to a song like Life in Tokyo by Japan, you could imagine Brian Ferry singing it. You could imagine
Okay.
Andy McKay playing saxophone on that. I think Phil Manzanera is an underrated guitarist. I think he's one of the most influential guitar players on me, but I don't think anyone would believe me if I said that. Another band that is underrated is Sparks, and I know they're getting their moment in the sun thanks to Edgar Wright's documentary. But for many years, I would say no. But Sparks are as influential as all of those guys. Who else is underrated? It's who else am I
Easier to
always
talk about underrated than overrated.
Yeah, definitely for me. Well, I mean, here's one. I don't know how people rate Todd Rundgren, but I wrote a whole book about Todd Rundgren, the producer and
Right.
and a musician. And I wrote this book called A Wizard, a True Star, Todd Rundgren in the Studio, which was the whole point of that book was to say, at that point, he wasn't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And this was like 10 years ago, I wrote that book. And I went around and I talked to all the artists he worked with, and I talked to people who worked on his records, his solo records, as well as the artists he produced. And I made this book that basically says the case for Todd Rundgren. Like if you read this book, you'll see why I talk about Todd Rundgren as much as I do. A few people I know were big fans, also like Mo Berg from The Pursuit of Happiness. So I think that kind counts as an underrated thing. I think if people don't realize Todd Rundgren is more than "Hello, It's Me," or he did a Bang on the Drum All Day, like so sometimes people know one or two songs by somebody. I think XTC are underrated, the band from England.
Yeah.
And
Making plans for Nigel.
Yeah, they think it's just making plans for Nigel.
Right.
And
it's more than that.
I mean, you talk to aficionados who know this stuff, and they're like, well, how could you underrate this band? They did this. So there's that thing too, right? You have this too, where you meet a bunch of people from different levels of either levels of interest in music, or you know, music isn't as important to their day-to-day life, or they're not as interested in popular music. They might be huge jazz fans. So there's the rating thing is very, it's hard to think there's any absolute opinion, I think.
Mhm. What is an average day for you, Paul? Like you're mentioning the Todd Rundgren, right? You also wrote the Kids in the Hall, One Dumb Guy.
Yeah.
Like what's an average day for you?
Well, like lately an average day is I have 3 projects on the go, and depending on which one needs my attention, I will try to make I don't know if you can see this, but this is a list of things I have to do today.
Yes.
And my wife is a professional organizer, and so she's really good at teaching me systems, because my brain is, actually, you've even heard this in this conversation, my brain is such that it will go 18 different directions if I don't have a what I call a roadmap.
I'm the same thing.
Yeah. So for instance, I am working on a book about John Candy that won't be out for at least a year.
Cool.
So I'm still doing interviews for it, and I interviewed Catherine O'Hara and Joe Flaherty, and I'm trying to get Eugene Levy, and they're putting the dates, or he got popular this year, so it's really hard to corral him. But I have different interviews in the can already for different people for that. I'm also working on a documentary as an executive producer. It's based on my one of my books, and I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it yet, but I'm working on a documentary that's supposed to be out next year with Amazon. And that's the first time I've been an executive producer on anything, and I had something to do with blocking out the story as well. And then I'm also doing the podcast every 2 weeks. Right. So that means booking people, because I pretty much do all the booking and recording of interviews from here, from this little home. They've set me up with a couple of nice things, including this SM7B microphone that I'm speaking into.
It's quite nice.
Yeah, and I got them to get me a boom microphone, because I found myself, I used to have the mic over on the side, and I'd be like out. You know, it's so during the whole COVID. I mean, the thing is, pre-COVID, I was still doing this Zoomy interview stuff, because I live in a place that's not LA and not New York and not Toronto and not Vancouver. Right. So I basically, I'm remote recording has been the godsend for this whole thing. So then there's one other thing that I do, which is actually, in this summer, I can tell you this. So my brother Mike is Mike Myers. We've no sense dancing around that. Mike has a TV series for Netflix that he's doing, and it's coming out next year on Netflix. And I worked on that as a double.
No way.
Because people are all saying, "Oh, you guys look too much alike." Well, when Mike's doing a thing where he's playing different prosthetic characters with prosthetic makeup on, I can really make it look like him. And so Mike convinced the people who pay money for things to fly me to England, you know, with all COVID testing and everything's 100% safe, or as safe as it can be. And so I just did 3 months working on this series where, if Mike is doing a scene where he's acting to himself, they'll shoot his close-ups on all the characters, but in long shots and things where he's handing a phone to somebody, it'll be me. And the idea is that you won't know it's me. The idea is that you'll just think that it's an expensive computer effect, when in fact, a lot of times it's not even, it's just me. And the makeup director is the guy who works on Saturday Night Live, who just won another Emmy, a guy named Louis Zakarian. And he just did an amazing job of making me look like him 100%. And the costumes are all the same. So that was a unique experience, which I still haven't processed, to be honest. It was 3 months living in London in an apartment. And just for me to be able to be based in London, England, after this crazy lockdown year, and have, having a free apartment and free groceries, and just, it was like, it was kind of the dream to live. Like, I'm a huge Anglophile, so just being in London every day for 3 months straight was amazing, you know.
Yeah, and of course working with your brother and stuff like that must have been cool, watching him on Saturday Night Live, like, over those years, right?
Oh, well, here's the thing. When you're young, and I went through a period where I think I had my ego as trying to make it as a rock star or musician or whatever. And people go, oh, he's your brother, is he, and they want to talk about your brother all the time. And he was on Saturday Night Live during the Wayne's World Mania came after that, and Austin Powers. It was so hard for me to bridge the difference between feeling super proud of him and also being like, I wouldn't even say competitive, because that's pathetic. He's so ahead in his thing that you don't want to play that game.
I mean,
but
he's one of the biggest stars on the planet, for Christ's sakes.
But here's what I've come to is, I feel confident as I got older that, I do love my brother. But more often what happens is I feel secure enough that I can also say, oh my God, he really is. People might disagree, but Mike, I think, is a genius, but he's also a hardworking genius who knows how to make. He doesn't do a lot of movies, but when he really has a chance to write and create something and produce it, he is like a dog with a bone. Like, he will not let go of this thing until it comes out close to what he wants.
Right.
And I watched him work for 3 months straight, and I came away with a even deeper appreciation of that. But I just want to say one more thing about that. Also, to spend 3 months as a grown man with your brother, and my brother Peter couldn't be there because he wasn't working on the show, but to at least one of my brothers to be there after all the things we've gone through in our lives and stuff like that. And he's got kids and I've got a family here, and we spent that time working in each other's like shadow. And I really respected him and felt really proud of him, but it felt great that we got to just talk. And on the weekends, we sometimes would go out and go have dinner and walk around and just talk about music and talk about life. And
just hang and be brothers.
You get to do that while you're sort of technically on the paycheck, which is like, that's a treat, man. Like, and that's a gift. I mean, at this age, to be able to spend 3 months out of my life, sort of not reliving my childhood, but almost sort of having a check-in call with your childhood and see how we're all doing as adults. It was like the best. And of course, I got to meet all these actors as well that Mike was working with, like Jennifer Saunders is in this thing, and Keegan Michael Key and Ken Jeong, and it's just amazing cast of actors or comedians who I really admire. And I got to be sort of in scenes with them while I'm going, Mike, I can't believe you got Jennifer Saunders in this. Like, it's so anyway. So that's the upshot of that, Todd. Forgive me for rambling.
One last thing on Mike, and then we'll move on. What's his best work? Like, which character is your favorite?
I think I can't do that. I mean, Wayne has such a special allure because Wayne, there's a lot of me in Wayne. Like, I'm not taking credit for it, but going to the guitar store as a kid and hanging out, and I wanted to put a sign up that says no stairway to heaven, but Wayne is close to me because I grew up in the suburbs. But I mean, Dr. Evil's such a tasty character, and Austin Powers is such an amazing original idea. So I mean, if you're gonna go there, that's an interesting episode of the Record Store Day podcast you might want to check out is I did an episode with Mike, which we never do. We never do stuff together. We once in a while we'll do stuff together, but we did an episode where Mike came on to promote the soundtrack to Austin Powers that was coming out for Record Store Day. So I had him on, but it ends up being a discussion of all the records we bought as kids. A lot of people like that episode. Look it up when you're looking up the Record Store Day podcast with Paul Myers. And on that same episode, Judd Apatow talks to me about his love of Warren Zevon. So it's a kind of a comedy episode. And we've had comedians. We've had Fred Armisen on twice. We've had Dave Foley of Kids in the Hall has been on. But and I am always welcome to bringing comedians in to talk about music, because as you may know, all comedians love music and all musicians love comedy. So it's just,
exactly. So back to the Kids in the Hall in your book and stuff. Are Kids in the Hall superior to SCTV? No.
They'll tell you that too. But here's the thing. The Kids in the Hall, the way it works is a continuum, right? Obviously, there's, for me, sketch comedy, gets really good with Monty Python. Monty Python spawns like SNL. And while SNL's happening, the Second City producers decide, hey, we should have our own show too. And they create something that's wholly original again. So SCTV changed the world. And also for Canadian kids like me, oh my God, they came from my backyard. and to see Canadian comedians making something that's competitive or at least on the same page as Python and SNL. And then the kids in the hall, being of my generation, they heard all that stuff and they said, let's make our own thing that's as original to us as Python and SCTV was. And so they created something that was in its wake. So to me, SCTV will always be the fathers of it. So it's hard to say they're better than the Kids in the Hall. But I will say this, Kids in the Hall holds up. There is so much, I've been doing this, I've been researching them for years now, not just as a fan. I was there for a lot of it. Like I was in the room during the tapings and I was on set for Brain Candy. Again, they're your peers and your friends. So you don't step back. And then what I'm at that part of my life where I'm stepping back and I'm going, oh my God, these people that are familiar to me, that are friends of mine who I can call anytime, are also geniuses. And I can't believe I'm not starstruck talking to them, because they're my brother and the Kids in the Hall, they're like icons of comedy. And yet it's hard to be reminded of that when they're kind of your friends. But stepping back and researching Kids in the Hall made me realize, oh my God, they really did. And they're making this new series for Amazon now that'll be out, I believe, in January. I think January is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Well, and I heard there was going to be like 7 or 8 episodes.
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know how many episodes. I thought it was 8 maybe.
Yeah.
But I know it's season 6. They're calling it season 6 rather than a whole new show.
Wow. So they're bringing back the seasons how many years later? That's great.
Yeah. Because they stopped after season 5 and made Brain Candy, and then that didn't turn out so well for them at the time.
Yeah.
So they're all in great spirits, and that troupe, they've had their fights. They were like, it's amazing to think they're like, the Eagles or something, like the hell freezes over. But over the years, they got to realize again how much they meant to each other. And as Dave Foley says, there's 4 of the worst people in the world that I absolutely love. They have this love-hate relationship with each other, and it comes across, and they love to make Kids in the Hall comedy together. I said music. I almost said music by accident.
As a fan, I can't wait for the new stuff. What are you binging right now? What are you binge watching?
I went back to Mad Men. I'm also watching Only Murders in the Building, which I like.
Yes,
it's hard to binge it because it's on every second week. I've been watching Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
But I also been, like I said, I've been going back to Mad Men and realizing that I loved it when it was on, but now I'm watching it with a whole different, it's a really amazing story and really well shot. And it's so sad. Like Mad Men's one of the saddest shows ever. Like it's just about the decay of this weird macho jungle that they created, and how, they're just like drinking themselves to death. And anyway, so it's really fun to watch because it's a really deep show. But Ted Lasso's fun. Ted Lasso, for me, I think I don't think of it as a comedy almost, because most of the time I'm just going, oh, that's cool. Mm-hmm. But Jason Sudeikis created this awesome character. Yeah, he created this character that's original, and that's they'll be talking about that as a Ted Lasso type character now. There'll be other shows that come on that go, he's kind of a Ted Lasso because he's created Ted Lasso.
Right.
So that's cool.
Yeah. Are you into those like the superhero movies, Justice League, X-Men, Avengers, and all that kind of shit? Like, what did you think when Martin Scorsese said that those styles of films aren't cinema?
I think, I'm not I appreciate superhero movies, but I don't really care. I don't really care. I will say that I appreciate Scorsese, and I'd love to know the full context of his comment, because I think that what guys like him are trying to do is say that maybe he makes a different kind of movie, and he grew up in a tradition of different kinds of movies, and it's not cool to diss contemporary movie franchises. And you'll get 2 other film critics who might go, it's the most amazing thing ever to have superhero movies, and so it's not about, so he's just one guy. Scorsese is
but he's a
master. He's a master. I mean, and sometimes people what's the term for it? They used to call it pimping you, like sort of when you poke someone to make them say something. So sometimes people might go, you must hate Marvel. You must hate Marvel. You must hate DC. And he'd be like, no, but surely you must hate that they get all this money. And he'll be like, oh, and then eventually he said, well, no, I don't think they're not filmed like I'm filmed. And like, okay, we got a quote.
That's the quote. Run with that. That's the headline.
Marty hates Ant-Man. Right. Like, yeah.
Right.
And so I don't know how that shit works. I just know that I know that people have opinions, and look at me earlier trying to answer the who's overrated question. I mean, I'm already expecting Misfits mail, so
it's coming.
So, yeah. Danzig has your name.
Yeah.
But anyway.
All right, Paul, I'm going to respect your time here. Wrap it up in a couple questions.
Okay, well, absolutely. I'm sorry I was late.
Star Trek.
Star Wars or Star Trek? Okay, Star Trek for me.
Star Trek, interesting.
I know. Look at me. I'm a horrible person.
And what do you like for Star Trek? Is it the original? Is it Captain Kirk and Spock on the original USS?
Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. So for me, it's like the Beatles. The rock and roll Beatles had their own thing, Twist and Shout, She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand. But I also like the Abbey Road Beatles. So for me, Star Trek: The Next Generation with the Picard and all that was their sort of mature White Album period. Yeah. And the original Star Trek has almost a hokey. It's like watching the Monkees. It's like it's fun, but you watch it mostly for the interesting ideas fleshed out in these bizarrely orange and gold tight t-shirts that Shatner would wear, and Spock being so Spock, and it's hard to not like Star Trek, the original, but the later ones were more Martin Scorsese would like the later ones, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think that, I think that what the allure of when people do like, and I like both. I personally would probably lean Wars over Trek, but I think what it is about Star Trek is that shit could possibly happen.
Yeah, I like the idea that they created a federation, and that they were on a. It's very interesting if you want to like the whole critique of U.S. foreign policy, but the whole idea that there would be the global police, interstellar policemen, just the idea that they would be like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police heading out into the unknown, and all that entails, good and bad, right? So
right. Oh, by the way, I guess this is 3 questions then. Did you vote during this last Canadian federal election? $700 fucking million, really? Who needs clean drinking water, right?
I didn't vote only because I was told during the last election that if you've been away for longer than 5 years, I don't have a Canadian address right now.
Oh.
And then Stephen Page of Bare Naked Ladies told me on the last day that you could register for the election, I mentioned online that I don't get to vote anymore because it's been 5 years. And Stephen, who lives in Syracuse, New York now, said, oh no, we can do it. And he showed me the form. He sent me to the form, and I started entering the form. And then it said, sorry, the registration closed at midnight last night. So I only found out like 2 or 3 days before the election or maybe a week before the election, that I couldn't register, and that you can't vote unless you register. I mean, maybe I was wrong about that too. So I just missed that election. I do get to vote in California elections though. So I voted no on the recall of Governor Gavin Newsom because I really didn't like who they were offering as alternatives. So, so yeah, I did not vote in the Canadian election. I sort of keep an eye on it. I have my opinions. I tend to be I tend to not hate Justin as much as a lot of people I know do, but I also really my politics are not conservative at all. So I think I used to vote NDP when I lived in Canada. Although I hear that in the BC area, the BC NDP was not as popular because of a history of how they were perceived. I don't know anything and this is the point where best for me to not pretend I know everything about what's going on in Canadian politics right now.
I think we're wading into waters where we're both like, I'm not really sure Canadian politics.
I have smart friends who I can call about this,
Yes,
so
exactly. Same. Okay, let's wrap it up with a question I love finding out, and hopefully you have a story, and if not, that's fine. Do you have a near death story where, somewhere where you could have died, not where you're like floating over your body and shit, but like, holy crap, I could have died just now?
Well, it's scary. Do you want to hear a scary story?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I went to South Africa with my wife in what year was that? 2017. And I heard you don't want to go out at night in Cape Town. And I heard that there's a lot of carjacking. I mean, they have a real inequity of poverty there, and a lot of people living in encampments, and they don't have the ghost of apartheid is everywhere. So there is unfortunately very violent crime at night. We were on our way to go somewhere else to go on a safari thing, so we weren't going to stay in long. But during the broad daylight, we're walking through a park, and I'm carrying my Sony camera, and some guy comes up to me with a box cutter and says, "Give me your camera."
Like an X-Acto knife box cutter.
Yeah. And my wife was like, well, "Who are you talking to?" And I said, "I'm not talking. He's swinging a knife at me." And my camera had a strap on it, and I didn't know how to I was going to give it to him, but I didn't understand the question. So I was hesitant. So I stepped back, and he saw that as me resisting him. I was like really trying to dodge him and yelling to my wife, get some help. And I also told her to stand back because I didn't want him, if he cut me, I didn't want him to cut her too. So it was one of those things like, I'll take this one. And so she's swinging at me. And then for some reason, I step back and he decides to trip me, and then swings at my leg and cuts my knee open. And at this point, some security guards came, and some park guards, and they were running towards him. He grabs my wife's cell phone because she basically handed it to him to say, take something and go, and to get him to stop cutting me. And so wow. And a whole bunch of really good things happened right after that, which was a person who had just bought an ice cream cone and had 3 clean napkins handed them to me, and they had a bottle of water so I could rinse the area off. And I held it down, and then we were lucky we had insurance, and we had a nice ambulance ride, and I had 6 stitches, and and I had but there was a moment where he was swinging towards my face before he tripped me that I thought, he's gonna kill me. And when I saw myself bleeding on the ground, and I thought, this is where it could have ended. Like that, I have to say, not to over dramatize it, but I thought to myself, this might have been my wife going home and saying, yeah, my husband got stabbed to death in Cape Town. Weird, huh? Like, and we both, of course you do all that thing of like, it didn't happen, so we're grateful and we're lucky, and let's just, maybe my life is good, and I'm protected or something. But all of those things, it's the closest I've had to a moment of going, holy cow, and I don't even have any ill will towards South Africa for this. I blame the lingering ghost of apartheid for creating these desperate conditions, but I'm not. That's not to say I don't let the guy off the guy who stabbed me is a dick. Okay, but like, totally. But I'm sorry that he felt desperate enough to stab me. But I also think
right,
maybe run for office. I don't know. I mean,
what to tell that guy. You can get one of those styles of people in any city, in any part of the world.
Yeah, and he was really high on something too, so it was like I could see it. Like he had that. I once almost got mugged in Toronto once by a guy with like completely red eyes, and I'm pretty sure angel dust was involved. So I don't know. So anyway, it's out there. I live in the United States, and I was more scared in Cape Town, so that was interesting. And I did have some PTSD the next 2 days in Cape Town. Like we were looking around everywhere, and
somebody's walking towards you, and it's like something sketchy.
My God, someone came up to us to ask us for directions, like in a very public area, and I did this thing where I fan out with my arms, like like what I said, hold on, stay back, say, what do you want? What would you like? What would you like?
Right.
Do you know, is this the number 6 bus? Yes, it's, and I pointed to the sign. It says right there, it's the number 6 bus. In other words, like I'm being a dick, but I'm kind of going, like, it's the number 6 bus, right? Like, you're like,
Right.
is this a ploy? But anyway, but it took me a while, but I feel safe on the streets of New York City. I feel safe in the streets of San Francisco.
Yeah.
I've been to, LA, nothing scary, but I got scared just thinking about the randomness of that. Anyway, there's your story. I don't talk about it all the time because I don't want to sound like I'm the only person who ever got mugged, but and I didn't lose my camera, so that was kind of neat.
That's good. Thanks again, Paul, for jumping on this morning.
Hey, really great to connect with you after all these years.
Good to talk to you. Yeah, you're easy to find on social media at Pull My Ears. That's a PULMY ears on social media.
It's like Pull My Ears with one L and all
with one L. One L. Yeah. Awesome, Paul. We'll see you online and have a great day. Good to talk.
Thanks for having me, Todd. Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye.